Poor Dad married a struggling single mom. She secretly owned half the city's real estate. He thought he was rescuing her, but she was hiding a fortune bigger than he could ever imagine. At first, it felt like a fairy tale, until cruel whispers spread through the town. She was just the maid. Poor Dad doesn't even know what he married. But just as hope rises, the unthinkable happens. At a glittering gala, her young son tugs a millionaire's sleeve and whispers, "Mommy says you're my daddy." Gasps, flashing cameras, the mom pale, the dad's jaw tightens. Overnight, their new life turns into a storm of lies, betrayal, and dangerous enemies who'll stop at nothing to tear them apart. Was she ever really struggling, or has she been hiding the truth all along? And when the past collides with the present, will this family survive or shatter forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting warm squares on the worn marble floor. Earl Carter shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his best suit feeling a bit tight across the shoulders. Years of bending over engines had broadened his frame, and the suit hadn't seen much use since his first wedding 18 years ago. His calloused fingers held a simple gold band, so light it seemed almost weightless. Earl glanced at Lila Martinez, who stood beside him in a modest cream-colored dress, her dark eyes bright with emotion. She'd insisted on a small, quiet ceremony, just the essential people in their lives. 7-year-old Micah fidgeted in his mini-suit, tugging at his clip-on tie while Jess, Earl's teenage daughter, gave him a gentle settle-down pat on the shoulder. Rev. May stood watching with her usual serene smile, her presence as comforting as a warm blanket on a cold day. The courthouse clerk, a thin woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, cleared her throat. "We are gathered here today to join Earl Carter and Lila Martinez in marriage." Earl's heart thumped steadily in his chest. He'd thought he'd be more nervous, but something about this felt right as a perfectly tuned engine humming under his hands. "Do you, Earl Carter, take Lila Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the clerk asked, her voice echoing slightly in the mostly empty room. "To have and to hold. From this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." Earl's voice came out gruff but clear, "I do." When it was Lila's turn, her "I do" was soft but unwavering, like everything about her. Earl had first noticed that quiet strength when she volunteered at the church kitchen, the way she could calm an angry visitor with just a few gentle words or organize chaos into order without raising her voice. The clerk nodded. "The rings, please." Earl's hands were steady as he slipped the simple band onto Lila's finger. Her hands were warm, and he could feel a slight tremor in them, the only sign of her nervousness. Lila then took the matching ring and placed it on Earl's finger. The metal felt foreign but welcome. "By the power vested in me by the state," the clerk announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Earl leaned down and gave Lila a gentle kiss. He heard Micah giggle and Jess let out a small "aw" that she'd probably deny later. Reverend May stepped forward to hug them both. "The Lord bless you and keep you," she said, her voice honey warm. "May his face shine upon you and give you peace." They signed the marriage certificate, the scratch of pen on paper making it official. Earl watched as Lila wrote her name in her neat handwriting next to his messier scrawl. Something swelled in his chest. Pride, maybe, or just plain happiness. Micah tugged at his mother's dress. "Are you Mrs. Carter now, Mommy?" Lila smiled down at him. "Yes, sweet boy. We're all Carters now." The small group made their way down the courthouse steps into the bright morning sunshine. The air was crisp with early fall, leaves just starting to turn golden at their edges. Earl's old pickup truck sat waiting in the parking lot, decorated with a few streamers that Jess had insisted on tying to the side mirrors. "I'll bring Micah in my car, Rev." May offered. "That way you two can have a moment alone before the reception." "Thanks, Rev," Earl said. He turned to Jess. "You riding with them too, kiddo?" Jess nodded, already helping Micah into Reverend May's sensible sedan. "See you at church, Dad. Mom." She hesitated just a fraction of a second on the last word, but her smile was genuine. That's when he saw it. A pink piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper, fluttering in the breeze like a warning flag. He grabbed it quickly, hoping Lila hadn't noticed. But as he unfolded the notice, his stomach dropped. The letterhead belonged to his garage's landlord, and the message was clear: lease non-renewal, effective in 90 days. The building was being sold, and the new owner, someone named Kincaid, had other plans for the property. Earl's fingers crumpled the edge of the paper. The garage was everything: his livelihood, his pride, the legacy he'd hoped to pass on to Jess if she wanted it. He'd built it from nothing after leaving the army, turned it into something honest and good. "Earl?" Lila's voice came from inside the truck. "Is everything all right?" He quickly folded the notice and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. This was their wedding day. He wouldn't let this shadow touch it. Not yet. Not when Lila looked at him with such trust. Not when she thought he was her security in this world. "Just a flyer," he said, climbing into the driver's seat. He managed a smile that he hoped looked more genuine than it felt. "Ready to head to our reception, Mrs. Carter?" Lila reached over and squeezed his hand, her new ring catching the sunlight. "Ready, Mr. Carter." Earl started the engine, its familiar rumble somewhat comforting. As they pulled out of the courthouse parking lot, heading toward the church where their friends waited with potluck dishes and well wishes, the notice seemed to burn in his pocket like a hot coal. But he pushed the worry down, focusing instead on Lila's hand in his, on the simple gold band that meant new beginnings, on the future they'd promised to face together, for better or worse, for richer or poorer. He just hadn't expected the worst part to show up quite so soon. Sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting warm squares on the worn marble floor. Earl Carter shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his best suit feeling a bit tight across the shoulders. Years of bending over engines had broadened his frame, and the suit hadn't seen much use since his first wedding 18 years ago. His calloused fingers held a simple gold band, so light it seemed almost weightless. Earl glanced at Lila Martinez, who stood beside him in a modest cream-colored dress, her dark eyes bright with emotion. She'd insisted on a small, quiet ceremony, just the essential people in their lives. 7-year-old Micah fidgeted in his mini-suit, tugging at his clip-on tie while Jess, Earl's teenage daughter, gave him a gentle settle-down pat on the shoulder. "Rev." May stood watching with her usual serene smile, her presence as comforting as a warm blanket on a cold day. The courthouse clerk, a thin woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, cleared her throat. "We are gathered here today to join Earl Carter and Lila Martinez in marriage." Earl's heart thumped steadily in his chest. He'd thought he'd be more nervous, but something about this felt right as a perfectly tuned engine humming under his hands. "Do you, Earl Carter, take Lila Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the clerk asked, her voice echoing slightly in the mostly empty room. "To have and to hold. From this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." Earl's voice came out gruff but clear. "I do." When it was Lila's turn, her "I do" was soft but unwavering, like everything about her. Earl had first noticed that quiet strength when she volunteered at the church kitchen, the way she could calm an angry visitor with just a few gentle words, or organize chaos into order without raising her voice. The clerk nodded. "The rings, please." Earl's hands were steady as he slipped the simple band onto Lila's finger. Her hands were warm, and he could feel a slight tremor in them, the only sign of her nervousness. Lila then took the matching ring and placed it on Earl's finger. The metal felt foreign but welcome. "By the power vested in me by the state," the clerk announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Earl leaned down and gave Lila a gentle kiss. He heard Micah giggle and Jess let out a small awe that she'd probably deny later. Reverend May stepped forward to hug them both. "The Lord bless you and keep you," she said, her voice honey warm. "May his face shine upon you and give you peace." They signed the marriage certificate, the scratch of pen on paper making it official. Earl watched as Lila wrote her name in her neat handwriting next to his messier scrawl. Something swelled in his chest. Pride, maybe? Or just plain happiness? Micah tugged at his mother's dress. "Are you Mrs. Carter now, Mommy?" Lila smiled down at him. "Yes, sweet boy. We're all Carters now." The small group made their way down the courthouse steps into the bright morning sunshine. The air was crisp with early fall, leaves just starting to turn golden at their edges. Earl's old pickup truck sat waiting in the parking lot, decorated with a few streamers that Jess had insisted on tying to the side mirrors. "I'll bring Micah in my car, Rev," May offered. "That way you two can have a moment alone before the reception." "Thanks, Rev," Earl said. He turned to Jess. "You riding with them too, kiddo?" Jess nodded, already helping Micah into Reverend May's sensible sedan. "See you at church, Dad." "Mom." She hesitated just a fraction of a second on the last word, but her smile was genuine. Earl helped Lila into the passenger seat of his truck, then walked around to the driver's side. That's when he saw it, a pink piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper, fluttering in the breeze like a warning flag. He grabbed it quickly, hoping Lila hadn't noticed. But as he unfolded the notice, his stomach dropped. The letterhead belonged to his garage's landlord, and the message was clear: lease non-renewal, effective in 90 days. The building was being sold, and the new owner, someone named Kincaid, had other plans for the property. Earl's fingers crumpled the edge of the paper. The garage was everything: his livelihood, his pride, the legacy he'd hoped to pass on to Jess if she wanted it. He'd built it from nothing after leaving the army, turned it into something honest and good. "Earl?" Lila's voice came from inside the truck. "Is everything all right?" He quickly folded the notice and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. This was their wedding day. He wouldn't let this shadow touch it. Not yet. Not when Lila looked at him with such trust. Not when she thought he was her security in this world. "Just a flyer," he said, climbing into the driver's seat. He managed a smile that he hoped looked more genuine than it felt. "Ready to head to our reception, Mrs. Carter?" Lila reached over and squeezed his hand, her new ring catching the sunlight. "Ready, Mr. Carter." Earl started the engine, its familiar rumble somewhat comforting. As they pulled out of the courthouse parking lot, heading toward the church where their friends waited with potluck dishes and well wishes, the notice seemed to burn in his pocket like a hot coal. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Earl slipped out of bed. His new wedding ring caught the dim light as he pulled on his work clothes. Old habits die hard, even on a Saturday. The pink eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter where he'd left it last night, after finally showing it to Lila. He filled the coffee maker with water, the quiet gurgle of brewing filling the silent house. Through the window, he could see the empty driveway where his truck should be. It was still at the church, left there after Rev. May insisted on driving them home from the reception. "You're up early." Lila's soft voice came from behind him. She stood in the doorway wearing a simple robe, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Earl managed a tired smile. "Couldn't sleep. Been running numbers in my head all night." "About the garage?" Lila moved to the cabinet, taking down 2 coffee mugs. The domestic gesture felt both new and familiar. 90 days, Earl said, shaking his head. "That's what, 3 months to either find a new location or—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Closing wasn't an option. Not with 3 employees depending on him and a stack of regular customers who trusted him with their vehicles. Lila poured coffee for both of them, adding a splash of cream to hers. "How much would you need? To relocate?" "Too much." Earl's voice came out gruffer than he intended. "Commercial property ain't cheap these days. We're talking tens of thousands just for deposits and permits, let alone renovations." He took a long sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground him. "I've got some savings, but nowhere near enough," Earl, Lila set her mug down carefully. I think it's time I showed you something. Let me get dressed. We need to take a drive. He looked at her curiously. Where to? Trust me? She touched his arm gently. 20 minutes later, they were in Rev. May's borrowed car, Lila directing him through quiet Saturday morning streets. They passed the downtown area, turning into a modest neighborhood of small businesses and professional offices. Lila pointed to a credit union housed in a plain brick building. Here, she said simply. Earl parked, confusion creasing his forehead. What's this about, Lila? She didn't answer immediately, just let him inside. The credit union had just opened, and only one teller stood behind the counter, arranging papers. Good morning, Mrs. Martinez, the teller said warmly, then caught herself. Oh, I suppose it's Mrs. Carter now? Congratulations. Thank you, Jenny, Lila replied. I need to access my safe deposit box, please. Earl watched as Lila signed forms and showed ID. Jenny disappeared into a back room and returned with a large metal box. She led them to a private viewing room, leaving them alone with the container. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she inserted a key. Earl, what I'm about to show you, I've kept it quiet for good reasons. To protect Micah, mostly, and myself. The box opened with a soft click. Inside, Earl saw stacks of papers, folders, and what looked like dozens of keys on organized rings. Lila began pulling out documents, property deeds, ledgers, financial statements. She spread them across the table, creating a paper trail that made Earl's head spin. These are rental properties, he said slowly, reading the addresses. All over the city. Yes. Lila's voice was steady now. I own them through various trusts and LLCs. It started small, just one duplex, years ago, then another and another. I reinvested everything, lived simply, kept quiet about it. Earl picked up one of the ledgers, his mechanic's hand seeming too rough for the neat columns of numbers. The totals at the bottom made his eyes widen. Lila, this is. Hundreds of units, she finished quietly. Mostly affordable housing, multi-family properties, some commercial spaces too. Earl sank into a chair, staring at the evidence of wealth spread before him. His new wife, the quiet woman he'd met serving soup at church, who lived in a modest house and drove a 10-year-old car, owned half the rental properties in their city. The building where your garage is, Lila continued, pulling out another document. I could buy it. Today, if you want. Keep you there or help you relocate, whatever works best. Relief flooded through Earl at the solution to his immediate problem, but it mixed with something else, uncertainty, maybe even hurt. Why didn't you tell me? Before the wedding? Would it have changed things? Lila asked softly. Would you have looked at me differently? Treated me differently? Earl thought about it. He probably would have. He'd been proud to think he could provide for Lila and Micah, to give them stability. Finding out she was the one with means to rescue him, it stung his pride, if he was honest. I've learned to be careful, Lila explained, touching his arm. When people know you have money, they treat you differently, judge you differently. I wanted you to know me, just me, before you knew about all this. Earl looked at the keys, each one representing a home, a business, a piece of their city. How did you? Where did all this come from? That's a longer story, Lila said. One I want to tell you properly, but right now we need to decide about your garage. The new owner, Kincaid, I know him. He's been trying to buy up that whole block for years. Earl stared at the documents, mind racing. The solution to his problem sat right in front of him, but accepting it meant accepting a new reality, one where his wife was secretly wealthy, where their whole dynamic shifted. I need some time, he said finally, to think about all this. Lila nodded, beginning to gather the papers. Of course. But Earl? She waited until he met her eyes. This doesn't change who I am, or who we are together. Jess Carter sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the worn wooden surface. She should have been working on her history paper, but her mind kept wandering back to the whispers she'd heard at the wedding reception. "Let's see what comes up," she muttered, typing Lila Martinez into the search bar. The first few results were useless. Social media profiles that hadn't been updated in years, a mention in a church newsletter about volunteer work. But then something caught her eye. A Society page article from 12 years ago. Her finger hesitated over the trackpad before clicking. The page loaded slowly, revealing a black and white photograph that made her breath catch. There was Lila, looking much younger, wearing a crisp maid's uniform. She stood in what appeared to be an elegant dining room, carefully arranging flowers in an expensive-looking vase. Behind her loomed the imposing figure of Preston Hawthorne, the city's most prominent real estate developer. Deep in conversation with an elegant woman Jess assumed was his wife. The Hawthornes host annual garden party. Jess read aloud, scanning the caption. Pictured, Preston Hawthorne and his late wife Margaret, with household staff. The sound of the front door opening made Jess jump. Earl's heavy footsteps echoed through the house, followed by the lighter patter of Micah's feet. "Jess?" her father called. "You home?" "In the kitchen," she answered, not taking her eyes off the screen. She heard Earl and Micah in the living room, probably sorting through the small pile of wedding gifts that still needed to be opened. The kitchen door swung open, and Lila entered carrying grocery bags. "I thought we could do spaghetti tonight," she said cheerfully. "Micah's favorite." She stopped short when she saw what was on Jess's screen. Jess turned the laptop slightly. "Were you really a maid for the Hawthornes?" Lila set the bags down slowly. The cheerful expression on her face had been replaced by something more guarded. "Yes," she said simply, "for several years." "The richest family in the city," Jess pressed. "And now you own all those properties?" The discovery of Lila's wealth was still fresh, still difficult to process. Earl appeared in the doorway, Micah peeking around his legs. "Everything okay in here?" "Show him," Jess said, turning the laptop toward her father. Earl stepped closer, squinting at the photograph. His expression changed as he recognized Lila in the maid's uniform, standing in that grand room that probably cost more than his garage would make in 10 years. "I can explain," Lila said quietly. She lifted Micah onto a chair and handed him a cookie from the counter. "Why don't we all sit down?" They gathered around the table, the grocery bags forgotten. Lila folded her hands in her lap, looking more nervous than Jess had ever seen her. "Yes, I worked as a housekeeper for the Hawthornes," she began. "I was a single mother with a 2-year-old son, trying to make ends meet. The pay was good, and Mrs. Hawthorne, Margaret, she was different from what you'd expect." "Different how?" Earl asked. His voice was carefully neutral. She noticed things, like how I would read the financial papers left on Mr. Hawthorne's desk while I was dusting. How I asked questions about their real estate dealings when I served coffee during their business meetings. Lila smiled faintly at the memory. One day, she called me into her study. I thought I was in trouble, but instead, she offered to mentor me. "Mentor you?" Jess couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Margaret Hawthorne came from nothing, like me," Lila explained. "She believed in lifting others up. She taught me about property management, investment strategies, how to navigate real estate law. When she saw I was serious about learning, she helped me secure a loan for my first duplex." Earl shifted in his chair. "The Hawthornes just gave you money?" "Not exactly." Lila reached for her purse and pulled out an old envelope. Inside was a photograph. Margaret Hawthorne and Lila, both smiling, standing in front of a small apartment building. "She created a mentorship fund. I had to match every dollar she invested with money I'd saved. It wasn't charity, it was opportunity." "But why keep it all secret?" Jess demanded. "Why pretend to be?" She trailed off, not wanting to say poor with Micah sitting right there, happily munching his cookie. "Because of how people treat you when they know you have money," Lila said softly. Because of my ex-husband, who would try to claim it all if he knew. Because I wanted to protect Micah from both the prejudice and the privilege. She looked at Earl, and because the work matters more than the recognition. Earl had been unusually quiet, his weathered hands flat on the table. And Preston Hawthorne, what does he think about all this? Lila hesitated. He doesn't know the full extent. After Margaret died 5 years ago, I kept my distance. But there's a foundation gala next week. I thought maybe we should attend, show goodwill, maybe talk about permits for the garage relocation. A gala? Earl's eyebrows shot up. With all those society folks? We were invited, Lila said, as newlyweds. It might be good for networking, for the garage's future. Jess watched her father carefully. She could see him struggling, with pride, with uncertainty, with the growing realization that his new wife's life was more complicated than any of them had imagined. I'll think about it, he said finally, standing up. Better get those groceries put away before the ice cream melts. The kitchen fell into awkward silence as Earl began unpacking the bags, his movements mechanical. Lila rose to help him, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. But Jess noticed how her father's shoulders remained tense, how carefully he avoided meeting Lila's eyes. Micah, oblivious to the tension, held up his empty cookie wrapper. Can I have another one, Mommy? Not before dinner, sweetheart, Lila answered. And for a moment, she sounded exactly like the gentle woman they'd first met, serving soup at church. But now Jess knew there was so much more beneath that simple facade, layers of history and secrets and carefully managed wealth. I should start the pasta, Lila said, reaching for a pot. Her voice carried a nervous edge as she added, The gala's on Saturday. We don't have to stay long. Earl tugged at his collar for the 100th time. The rented tuxedo felt like a straitjacket, and the crystal chandeliers of the Hawthorne Foundation's grand ballroom made him squint. Around him, the city's elite moved in graceful circles, their jewelry catching the light, their laughter carrying the practiced notes of privilege. You look handsome, Lila whispered, squeezing his arm. She wore a simple navy blue evening gown that somehow made her look both elegant and approachable. Her hair was swept up, revealing delicate pearl earrings, a wedding gift from Rev. May, I feel like a mechanic playing dress-up, Earl muttered, then immediately regretted it when he saw the flash of hurt in Lila's eyes. Sorry, just nervous. Me too, she admitted, adjusting Micah's little bow tie. The 7-year-old looked adorable in his miniature suit, though he kept trying to untuck his shirt. But we only need to stay an hour, just long enough to Mr. and Mrs. Carter. A crisp voice interrupted. They turned to find Preston Hawthorne himself approaching, his silver hair immaculate, his tuxedo probably worth more than Earl's annual income. How unexpected to see you here. Earl felt Lila's grip tighten on his arm. Mr. Hawthorne, she said carefully, thank you for the invitation. You remember my husband, Earl? Of course. Preston's handshake was firm but brief. His eyes lingered on Lila for a moment too long, as if trying to reconcile the elegant woman before him with the maid who had once dusted his bookshelves. And this must be your son. Micah stared up at the tall man with undisguised curiosity. You have a really big house, he announced. A few nearby guests tittered, and Earl saw Preston's polite smile tighten. Yes, well, please enjoy the evening. The silent auction items are in the East Wing. With a curt nod, he moved away to greet other guests. That went well, Earl said dryly. Lila let out a shaky breath. Let's get something to drink. They made their way to the bar, where Earl ordered a club soda, and Lila asked for sparkling water. Micah bounced on his toes, pointing at a towering chocolate fountain across the room. Can I go look, please? Stay where we can see you, Lila cautioned, and don't touch anything. As Micah scampered off, Earl watched the crowd. He recognized some faces from the newspaper, bank presidents, real estate developers, old money families whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings. A few gave them curious glances, probably wondering how a mechanic and his new wife had crashed their exclusive party. "I should find Preston again," Lila said, sipping her water. "Maybe if we could talk about the garage situation." "He didn't seem too interested in talking," Earl pointed out. "He's just formal. Margaret always said, he puts on a show for these events, but he's different in private meetings." Earl tried not to think about how well Lila seemed to know the Hawthorns' private sides. Instead, he scanned the room for Micah, spotting him near a group of ladies cooing over his bow tie. A photographer circulated through the crowd, flashbulbs popping. Earl noticed how Lila subtly turned away whenever the camera pointed in their direction. Even here, she was trying to stay invisible, despite owning as much property as some of these socialites. "Mrs. Carter?" A woman in a red dress approached, her smile sharp as cut glass. "I'm Victoria Kincaid. My husband Ralph chairs the zoning board. I believe he's handling your husband's situation?" Earl felt his jaw clench. Ralph Kincaid was the one who'd sent that lease termination notice, who'd been trying to push out small businesses like his garage in favor of luxury developments. "Yes," Lila replied smoothly. "We're hoping to discuss some alternatives." "Oh, but these changes are so important for neighborhood character," Victoria said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "We can't have certain elements bringing down property values." Before Earl could respond, he noticed Micah was no longer by the chocolate fountain. His eyes swept the room, heart rate picking up until he spotted his stepson's small figure weaving between elegant gowns and dinner jackets, heading straight for Preston Hawthorne. "Excuse us," Earl muttered, already moving, but the crowd was thick and Micah was quicker. By the time they got within earshot, the boy had already tugged on Preston's sleeve. The tall man looked down, annoyed at the interruption of his conversation with what appeared to be a judge. "Yes?" Micah's clear voice carried in the sudden lull of conversation, "Mommy says you're my daddy." The silence that followed was absolute. Earl felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Beside him, Lila had gone completely still, her face drained of color. Then came the gasps, the murmurs. The sound of camera shutters clicking rapidly. Preston Hawthorne stared at Micah, then at Lila, his face a mask of shock and something else. Recognition? Fear? The judge next to him took a deliberate step back, as if scandal might be contagious. "I never," Lila started to say, but her voice failed. Earl's mind raced through a dozen moments. Lila's years working at the Hawthorne estate, her careful avoidance of Preston, the way she'd kept her wealth hidden. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Victoria Kincaid's voice cut through the tension. Well, isn't this interesting?" More cameras flashed. Someone was already typing furiously on their phone. Earl could practically see the gossip spreading across the city's social networks, could imagine tomorrow's headlines. Micah, sensing the adults' reactions but not understanding them, backed away from Preston. "Did I say something wrong?" Earl wanted to comfort the boy, to shield him from the predatory gazes now fixed on their family. But his feet seemed rooted to the spot as he watched his new life, his marriage, his trust, his pride, crack like fine china dropped on marble floors. Preston finally found his voice. This is preposterous. I never. We should discuss this privately." But it was too late for privacy. Phones were out everywhere now, recording every moment. Earl saw at least 3 society reporters scribbling in small notebooks. Through the crowd's whispers he caught fragments. The maid? All those properties. Poor Earl Carter. Lila swayed slightly, and Earl's arm went around her automatically, despite the storm of emotions churning inside him. Her skin felt cold through the thin fabric of her dress. "We should go," he said quietly. She nodded, reaching for Micah's hand. But as they turned toward the exit, Earl knew it wasn't just the gala they were leaving behind. They were walking away from any chance of a quiet life, any hope of keeping Lila's secrets contained. The whispers followed them across the ballroom. Earl kept his eyes forward, his posture military straight, even as his world tilted on its axis. Just before they reached the doors, he heard Victoria Kincaid's voice carrying clearly across the murmuring crowd. Ralph will want to hear about this immediately. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains, but its warmth couldn't chase away the chill that had settled over the Carter household. Earl sat at the worn wooden table, his coffee untouched, while Lila's hands trembled as she scrolled through her phone. Jess paced behind them, occasionally pausing to peer over their shoulders at the flood of notifications. From Maid to Millionaire. The Gold Digger's Guide. Jess read aloud, her voice tight with anger. How can they print such garbage? Earl reached over and gently took the phone from Lila's shaking fingers. Maybe we should turn these off for a while. I need to know what they're saying, Lila whispered. I need to protect Micah. As if on cue, they heard the 7-year-old's cartoons playing softly in the living room. They'd kept him home from school today, knowing the media circus would be waiting at the gates. Another phone buzzed. Jess's this time. Her face darkened as she read the screen. The comments are getting worse. Someone just posted that old photo of Mom in her uniform, but they've edited it, made it look. She couldn't finish. Earl's jaw clenched. The casual cruelty of it all made his mechanic's hands itch to fix something, but this wasn't a broken engine he could repair with tools and time. Sources close to Preston Hawthorne suggest long-term relationship with domestic staff. Lila read from her tablet, her voice barely audible. Questions arise about property acquisitions and zoning approvals. She set the tablet down, pressing her palms flat against the table. They're trying to make it sound like We know it's not true, Earl said firmly, though the words tasted bitter. He still hadn't processed everything, the revelation of Lila's wealth, Micah's shocking announcement, the implications that hung in the air between them. But seeing her pain cut through his own confusion. Jess dropped into a chair, her teenage bravado cracking. Dad, there are reporters outside Mrs. Henderson's house across the street. They're watching our door. Earl stood and peered through the curtains. Sure enough, 2 news vans had parked along their modest street, cameras ready. He watched one of their neighbors hurry past, head down, avoiding the journalists who tried to wave her over. My tenants, Lila said suddenly. If this gets traced back to the properties, to the trusts. Ralph Kincaid's already trying to challenge the ownership structures. He could use this too. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Earl wanted to comfort her. But before he could move, his own phone lit up with a text from one of his regular customers. Sorry, Earl. Might need to take my business elsewhere. Don't want to get caught up in all this drama. Jess saw it too. They can't do that. Your work is the best in the city. People are scared of controversy, Earl said quietly, remembering other times he'd seen good folks turn away when things got complicated. His military service had taught him how quickly people could choose the easy path over the right one. Another notification pinged. Lila reached for it automatically, then recoiled. The headline screamed, Hawthorne Hair or Hustler's Kid. DNA test demanded. I never told Micah that Preston was his father, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know why he said that. I've never even. Preston and I. Never. Earl pulled his chair closer to hers. Despite his own whirling thoughts, his soldier's instincts kicked in. Assess the threat, protect the unit, then we'll deal with it, together. How? Jess demanded. These people are destroying our family's reputation, and all those comments about... She gestured at Lila, not wanting to say the racist words she'd seen online. We tell the truth, Earl said simply, about everything. Lila looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. Even about the properties? The trusts? Especially about those. Show them who you really are, not their headlines. A sharp knock at the door made them all jump. Through the window they could see the reporters perking up, cameras raising. Earl stood, but Jess was faster. She reached the door first, checking the peephole. Her whole body stiffened. It's a man I don't know. Designer suit, fancy car in the driveway. Lila went pale. "No," she whispered. "Not now." Before any of them could decide what to do, the door swung open. Calvin Rowe stood there, immaculate in his tailored suit, a practiced smile on his face. He looked nothing like the man who'd abandoned Lila and Micah years ago, except for that gleam of opportunity in his eyes. "Lila," he said smoothly, cameras clicking behind him, "we need to talk." Earl moved to stand beside his wife, noting how she seemed to shrink into herself, so different from the confident woman who'd shown him those property deeds just days ago. Calvin's smile widened as he took in the modest kitchen, the worried faces, the phone still buzzing with notifications. "Looks like you hit the jackpot, Lila," he said, his voice carrying just enough for the reporters to hear. "Maybe it's time we renegotiate custody." Earl felt something shift inside him, from confusion to clarity, from hurt to purpose. He squared his shoulders, drawing himself up to his full height. He might not have Calvin's expensive suit or practiced charm, but he had something better, a promise to protect his family, old and new. He said nothing, but his stance spoke volumes. He wouldn't let this man destroy their peace. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows of Reverend May's office, casting colorful shadows across the worn carpet. Earl and Lila sat side by side on the old leather couch, their shoulders barely touching. The past 24 hours had left them both looking tired and drawn. May settled into her familiar armchair, her gentle eyes taking in their exhaustion. She folded her hands in her lap, waiting patiently as Earl shifted uncomfortably and Lila dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Calvin's threatening to take Micah," Lila finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's talking about financial stability and proper environment. After all these years of not caring." Earl's jaw tightened. "And my customers are dropping like flies. 20 years of honest work, and now they think I'm mixed up in some kind of scandal. The reporters won't leave our street," Lila added. "Someone spray-painted Gold Digger on our fence last night." Reverend May nodded slowly, letting them empty their hearts. The old radiator clicked and hummed in the corner, a familiar sound that had accompanied countless counseling sessions over the years. "And how's young Micah handling all this?" she asked. "He's confused," Lila said. "He keeps asking why everyone's mad at Mommy. I still don't understand why he said that about Preston Hawthorne." "Kids pick up on things," May said. "Maybe he overheard something, twisted it around in his mind. 7-year-olds try to make sense of the world however they can." Earl leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't know how to protect them, any of them. Jess is furious at the world, Micah's scared, and Lila." He glanced at his wife. "I feel like I'm watching everything slip through my fingers." May stood and walked to her window, looking out at the church's small garden. "You know, when I first started pastoring here 30 years ago, this neighborhood was different. People looked out for each other. Now we've got developers buying up blocks, pushing folks out, talking about urban renewal when they mean poor folks removal." She turned back to face them. "Lila, why did you start buying those properties?" Lila straightened slightly. I saw what was happening. Families being priced out, homes where generations had lived, being torn down for luxury condos. Mrs. Hawthorne taught me about property law, about investment. She said, 'Child, sometimes you have to work from the inside to change things. And you've kept those buildings affordable all these years, May said, "protected your tenants." "Yes, but," and Earl, May continued, "how many young men have you taught basic car maintenance to? How many single moms have you helped with payment plans when their transmissions gave out?" Earl shrugged uncomfortably. "Just trying to do right by people." May sat back down, leaning forward intently. "Listen to me, both of you. You're sitting here afraid of the light, when the light is exactly what we need. You've been given tools, yes, even wealth, but tools aren't meant to be hidden. They're meant to build with. But the media," Lila started. "Will write what they write," Reverend May cut in firmly. "But actions speak louder than headlines. Step into the light. Do the good only you can do with what you've been given. Earl and Lila exchanged glances. What exactly are you suggesting? Earl asked. I'm suggesting you stop hiding and start leading. This city needs healing. Not just buildings, but hearts. You've got property, Earl's got skills, and between you've got more love than most folks know what to do with. Lila's eyes widened slightly. The empty Wilson Street complex, it's got 12 units, all needing work, but the bones are good. And I know veterans who need jobs, need homes, Earl added, sitting up straighter. Guys with skills who just need a chance. Rev. May smiled. Now you're thinking. The light doesn't just expose, it illuminates, shows the way forward. They talked for another hour, possibilities expanding with each minute. When they finally left Reverend May's office, something had shifted in both of them. The weight hadn't lifted entirely, but it had transformed into something more like purpose. That evening, they sat at their kitchen table long after Micah and Jess had gone to bed. Earl had brought out his old graph paper from the garage, and Lila had her property listing spread across the table. If we convert the Wilson Street units to transitional housing, Lila said, marking the paper with her pencil, we could offer reduced rent to veterans in the job training program. Earl nodded, making calculations in his worn notebook. My shop could take on 3 apprentices to start. Basic mechanics, but also building maintenance, general repairs. Real skills they can use anywhere. And here, Lila pointed to another property. These 4 duplexes. They're solid but need updating, perfect for single-parent families. We could work with the women's shelter for referrals. Homefront Revival, Earl said quietly, testing the name they'd chosen, bringing people home. Lila reached across the table and took his hand. Are you sure about this? Going public means everyone will know about the money, about everything. Earl squeezed her fingers gently. I married you, not your bank account. And maybe this is why we found each other. To do something bigger than ourselves. They worked late into the night, sketching plans, making lists, seeing their city through new eyes. The media circus outside seemed distant now, less important than the vision taking shape on paper and in their hearts. When they finally went up to bed, the kitchen table was covered with their plans, blueprints for hope, drawn in pencil and possibility. The summer sun beat down on Wilson Street as volunteers swarmed over the old brick duplexes like busy ants. The sound of power tools and laughter filled the air, mixing with the scent of fresh paint and sawdust. Earl wiped sweat from his forehead with a bandana, watching a group of teenagers cart broken furniture to a dumpster. The buildings were slowly transforming, peeling paint replaced with warm colors, broken steps rebuilt, gardens cleared of weeds and debris. Mr. Carter, a young voice called out. We found another broken window in Unit 4. Be right there, Tommy, Earl replied, gathering his tools. As he walked across the patchy lawn, he marveled at how much had changed in just a week. The cynical headlines were still there, but they'd been pushed down by images of community members working side by side, rebuilding their neighborhood. Inside his garage across town, the afternoon shift was just starting. 6 teenagers gathered around an old Chevy, their faces eager as Earl's longtime mechanic, Joe, demonstrated how to change brake pads. Remember, Joe said, pointing to the worn metal, this is what happens when you let them go too long. Safety first, always. The kids nodded seriously, taking notes in their workbooks. Earl smiled, remembering how skeptical Joe had been about the training program. Now his gruff mentor was in his element, passing on decades of knowledge to the next generation. In the garage's tiny office, Jess sat with 3 middle school students, textbooks spread across a folding table. So if x equals 7, she explained patiently, what happens when we multiply both sides by 3? 21. Piped up Maria, her face lighting up with understanding. Exactly, Jess grinned, giving the girl a high five. She caught Earl watching from the doorway and offered a small smile. Though she was still processing everything, helping these kids seemed to center her. Across town, Lila sat on a freshly painted porch with Mrs. Washington, an elderly tenant who'd lived in her building for 30 years. The older woman's weathered hands wrapped around a glass of lemonade as she shared stories about the neighborhood's history. "Used to be, everybody knew everybody," Mrs. Washington said. "We looked out for each other's kids, shared garden vegetables, celebrated together. Then the hard times came, and people started leaving. But this?" She gestured at the bustling work crews. "This feels like old times." Lila listened intently, taking mental notes. Each conversation revealed another thread in the community's tapestry, another need they could address. "What else would make this feel more like home again?" she asked. Mrs. Washington's eyes sparkled. "Well, we used to have the most beautiful flower gardens, and there was a little library, just a cabinet really, where folks could share books." By mid-afternoon, Earl had moved to the community center they were converting from an empty storefront. Veteran volunteers worked alongside local contractors, installing new drywall and updating the electrical system. The space would soon house job training classes, tutoring sessions, and community meetings. "Looking good, Carter," called out Mike, a former Army sergeant, now learning building maintenance. "Never thought I'd be doing this kind of work, but it feels right, you know?" Earl nodded, understanding completely. Every nail driven, every engine fixed, every math problem solved was building something larger than themselves. The media circus that had threatened to tear them apart had instead revealed their strength. At the property management office, no longer just a P.O. box, but a real storefront with big windows. Lila met with a single mother holding a squirming toddler. The woman's eyes filled with tears as Lila explained the reduced rent program. "I never thought I'd find a decent place I could afford," she whispered, bouncing her son on her knee. "Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely sure," Lila replied warmly. "We just need to get your paperwork started. And there's childcare available while you attend the job training classes." The sun was setting when Earl and Lila finally made it home. Their clothes were paint-stained, their muscles ached, but their hearts were full. They sank onto their living room couch, hands automatically finding each other. "Did you see Tommy showing the younger kids how to use the power sander?" Earl asked, his voice proud. "That boy's got a real talent for teaching." Lila smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And Maria's mom told me she's bringing her famous tamales for the community dinner next week. Said she wants to teach a cooking class once the kitchen's ready. It's really happening, isn't it?" Earl squeezed her hand gently. "All those empty buildings coming back to life, people helping people." "It is," Lila agreed softly. "And you know what? For the first time since everything happened, I'm not worried about what people are saying. The work speaks for itself." Earl nodded, feeling the same quiet pride settling in his chest. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight paint their walls golden. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to build something meaningful. But for now, they simply held hands and breathed, grateful for each other and the community rising around them. The fluorescent lights of the city clinic hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the already tense scene. Earl Carter stood with his arms crossed, his weathered face set like granite, as he watched his wife and Preston Hawthorne sit in adjacent chairs. A lab technician in blue scrubs moved between them, preparing the DNA collection materials. Camera flashes leaked through the clinic's Venetian blinds. Someone had tipped off the press. Outside, reporters huddled on the sidewalk like crows, their microphones and cameras ready to capture any morsel of drama they could find. Lila sat straight-backed in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress that made her look both elegant and approachable. A choice Earl knew wasn't accidental. Every move they made now ended up dissected in the media. Preston Hawthorne occupied his chair like it was a throne. Though his usual polish showed signs of wear, his tie was slightly askew, and faint shadows lurked under his eyes. The scandal had taken its toll on him too. "Mrs. Carter, if you could open your mouth, please," the technician said, holding up a long cotton swab. Her name tag read, Susan, and she had the practiced neutrality of someone used to handling delicate situations. Lila complied, and Susan swabbed the inside of her cheek with gentle efficiency. The sound of camera shutters clicked rapidly outside. Somehow, they'd found an angle through the blinds. "Mr. Hawthorne, you're next," Susan said, pulling out a fresh swab. Preston cleared his throat. "Let's get this over with." His voice carried the clipped tone of a man used to giving orders rather than following them. Earl watched the process with a mixture of anger and resignation. The DNA test hadn't been their idea. Their lawyer had insisted it was the only way to quiet the rumors. But standing here, watching it happen, made everything feel too real. "There," Susan said, sealing both samples in separate sterile containers. "We'll have the results in 3 to 5 business days." "Thank you," Lila said softly, rising from her chair. She moved toward Earl, who uncrossed his arms to receive her. Preston stood as well, adjusting his suit jacket. "I trust this will put an end to these unfortunate speculations." He didn't quite meet their eyes. Earl's jaw tightened. Unfortunate seemed like too mild a word for the chaos these rumors had caused, but he held his tongue, remembering May's counsel about taking the high road. "We'll contact your offices when the results are ready," Susan assured them. Labeling the samples carefully, they had to exit through separate doors to avoid the media circus. Earl and Lila slipped out through the staff entrance, where their truck waited in the back parking lot. Earl helped Lila in, then circled around to the driver's side. The drive home was quiet. Earl's hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles white. Lila stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of their city slide past. When they finally reached their modest house, Earl killed the engine, but didn't move to get out. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dashboard. 3 to 5 days, he said, his voice rough. "Feels like it's going to be torture, waiting that long." Lila turned to face him, her eyes soft with understanding and something deeper. "Whatever it says," she whispered, reaching for his hand, "I only ever loved one man." Earl leaned over and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. But even as he held her close, doubt flickered in the shadows of his mind, impossible to completely silence. They sat there in the gathering dusk, neither quite ready to go inside, and faced the questions in their children's eyes. The autumn sun painted the neighborhood in warm, golden light as crowds gathered for the Homefront Revival block party. Restored duplexes lined both sides of Maple Street, their fresh paint gleaming. Gone were the broken windows and sagging porches. In their place stood proud homes with bright flower boxes and welcome mats. A makeshift stage had been set up at the end of the street, draped with red, white, and blue bunting. The New Day Fellowship Choir, dressed in royal blue robes, swayed as they sang Amazing Grace. Their voices carried across the growing crowd, mixing with the sounds of children's laughter and the sizzle of grills. Earl Carter stood at the edge of the stage, tugging at his collar. He wasn't used to wearing a tie, but today was special. His hands kept drifting to the small velvet box in his pocket, making sure it was still there. Lila moved through the crowd like a quiet blessing, stopping to hug each of the new tenants. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that made her look radiant. Every few minutes, she'd catch Earl's eye and smile, making his heart skip just like it had that first day in the church kitchen. "Dad?" Jess appeared at his elbow, holding a clipboard. "The first family's ready for their keys." Earl nodded, watching as Reverend May took her place at the podium. The elderly pastor's voice rang out clear and strong over the PA system. "Brothers and sisters," she began, "today we celebrate more than just buildings. We celebrate hope made real through love and hard work." The crowd quieted, gathering closer to the stage. 10 families stood in a line near the steps, each clutching an envelope containing their lease, with the first month's rent forgiven. When Earl and Lila Carter launched Homefront Revival, Rev. May continued. Some folks said it couldn't be done. But look around you now. Cheers erupted. Someone started chanting, Carter, Carter, until Lila raised her hands, shaking her head with characteristic humility. The ceremony began. One by one, families came forward to receive their keys. A Vietnam veteran and his wife, tears streaming down their faces. A single mother whose teenage son would now have his own room to study. An elderly couple who could finally afford to live near their grandchildren. Earl helped each person up the stairs, his strong mechanic's hand steady and sure. Lila handed over the keys with a quiet word of blessing for each family. Together, they looked like they'd been doing this their whole lives. When the last key had been given, Rev. May raised her hands. Now, I believe Earl has something he'd like to say. Earl's heart hammered as he stepped to the microphone. He wasn't much for public speaking, but he'd practiced these words for days. Lila, he said, his voice rough with emotion, when we married at the courthouse, I gave you a simple band. I thought I was helping you. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket. Turns out, you were the one helping me all along. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Earl opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring studded with small diamonds. It had cost him 3 months of savings, but seeing Lila's eyes fill with tears made it worth every penny. This ring, he continued, is for the courage you carry, for showing me that true wealth isn't about what's in our bank accounts, it's about what's in our hearts. Lila covered her mouth with her hands as Earl knelt on one knee. The crowd fell silent. Will you accept this second ring? Earl asked, as a promise that whatever comes next, we'll face it together? Yes, Lila whispered, her voice breaking. 1,000 times yes. Earl slid the ring onto her finger next to her original wedding band. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The choir spontaneously broke into "Oh Happy Day," and people started dancing right there in the street. The afternoon flowed like honey after that. Children ran between tables loaded with potluck dishes. Veterans swapped stories over barbecue. Young mothers gathered on front porches, already planning carpools and babysitting rotations. As dusk approached, someone set up a portable speaker system. The first notes of "At Last" drifted across the block party, and Earl held out his hand to Lila. May I have this dance, Mrs. Carter? They swayed together on the makeshift dance floor, other couples joining them under strings of twinkling lights. The first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. Near the refreshment table, Jess watched her father and Lila dance. 7-year-old Micah stood beside her, his small hand in hers. He looked up at her with those serious eyes that seemed to see right through grown-up pretenses. Are you happy now? He asked. Jess thought about all the changes of the past months, the secrets, the scandal, the hard work of building something new. She watched how tenderly her father held Lila, how peaceful they both looked. The first firework burst overhead, sending cascades of gold and silver sparkling down. Micah jumped, and Jess pulled him close. Maybe we're really a family after all, she whispered into his hair. More fireworks painted the sky, reflecting in the windows of the restored homes. Earl and Lila continued to dance, their shadows merging into one as the colors rained down around them. In that moment, with their community gathered close and their hearts full of joy, it felt like they'd finally found their way home. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight as Earl and Lila sat at their small table, still glowing from the block party. Their formal clothes were rumpled from dancing, and Earl had loosened his tie. Empty paper plates and half-eaten cake sat forgotten between them. I still can't believe you got me another ring, Lila said, turning her hand to catch the light on the diamonds. Earl reached across the table to take her hand. You deserve. His phone buzzed, then Lila's. Then the house phone started ringing. Jess burst into the kitchen in her pajamas, clutching her laptop. Dad, turn on the news. Earl grabbed the remote and flicked on the small TV mounted under the cabinet. A breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Breaking: Court orders freeze on Martinez-Carter properties amid fraud allegations. The news anchor's voice filled their tiny kitchen. In a shocking development, all assets connected to real estate mogul Lila Martinez-Carter have been frozen pending investigation. An anonymous complaint alleges fraudulent property transfers and questionable deed arrangements dating back several years. Lila's face drained of color. That's impossible. Every transaction was legal, documented. More phones buzzed. Text messages flooded in from tenants, volunteers. Reverend May, Mom, Micah called from the living room. There's people with cameras outside. Earl pushed back from the table. I'll handle them. The police scanner in the corner, a habit from Earl's garage days, crackled to life. All units respond. Structure fire reported at 1242 Maple Street. Lila grabbed Earl's arm. That's the Thompson duplex. We just gave them keys today. They rushed to the front window. In the distance, an orange glow lit up the night sky. Fire truck sirens wailed. Stay here with the kids, Earl said, already grabbing his keys. Earl? No. But he was out the door, dodging news vans as he sprinted to his truck. The short drive to Maple Street felt endless. When he turned the corner, his heart nearly stopped. The duplex one they'd spent weeks renovating was engulfed in flames. Smoke poured from broken windows. A crowd had gathered behind hastily strung police tape. Earl spotted Mrs. Thompson in her nightgown, crying hysterically. My grandson, he was sleeping upstairs. Without thinking, Earl ducked under the tape. A police officer shouted, Sir, stay back. But Earl was already running. 20 years of Army training kicked in. He pulled his shirt over his nose and charged through the front door. Heat slammed into him like a wall. Smoke burned his eyes. The stairs groaned under his feet as he took them two at a time. Tommy, he shouted. Tommy, where are you? A small cry came from behind a door. Earl shoulder-checked it open. 7-year-old Tommy huddled in a corner, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Earl scooped him up just as something crashed behind them. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, blocking their exit. Coughing, Earl carried Tommy to the window. Fire trucks were arriving, extending their ladders. But the flames were spreading fast. Earl wrapped Tommy in his jacket and held him tight. Close your eyes, buddy. Hold on to that dinosaur. They climbed onto the window ledge. The ladder was still too far away. Below, firefighters were unfolding a jump cushion. Trust me, Tommy? The boy nodded against his chest. Earl jumped. They hit the cushion hard. Pain shot through Earl's back and shoulders. But Tommy was safe, already being whisked away by paramedics. Then the world started to spin. Earl tried to stand, but couldn't. His lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. The last thing he saw was Lila's face, tears streaming down her cheeks as they loaded him into an ambulance. The hospital room was too bright, too white. Machines beeped steadily. Earl's arms and chest were wrapped in bandages. An oxygen mask covered his face. Lila hadn't left his side for hours. Her elegant dress from the block party was stained with soot and tears. Outside his room, reporters circled like vultures. Through the glass walls, Earl could see TV screens in the waiting area. Every channel showed the same headlines: Real estate empire built on sand, from maid to mogul, a story of fraud, tenants left homeless as assets freeze. Lila's phone kept buzzing with messages from people pulling out of Homefront revival. Comments, sections filled with vicious accusations: gold digger, exploiter, fraud. She turned off her phone and took Earl's bandaged hand. I'm so sorry, she whispered. This is all my fault. Earl tried to shake his head, but everything hurt. He pulled down his oxygen mask. Stop, he managed to rasp. But look what happened. The fire, your injuries, everyone turning against us. Because you helped people? His voice was rough. Because you gave homes to folks who needed them? They're saying I stole everything, that I forged documents, that I... She broke down sobbing. Earl squeezed her hand, ignoring the pain. Outside, camera flashes lit up the hallway windows like lightning. A nurse came in to check Earl's vitals. She gave Lila a sympathetic look. "More reporters arriving downstairs, Mrs. Carter. Security's doing their best, but—" Lila nodded, wiping her eyes. She had to be strong now, for Earl, for their family, for all the people counting on them. But as she looked at Earl's bandaged face, at the media circus growing outside, at their dream of helping others crumbling around them, she felt more lost than she ever had as a young single mother with nothing but hope and determination. The nurse adjusted Earl's medications, and his eyes started to drift closed. Lila leaned down to kiss his forehead. "Rest," she whispered. "I'll be right here." Through the window, she watched another news van pull up to the hospital. The vultures were circling, hungry for their story of scandal and shame. But they didn't know Earl Carter. They didn't know her. And they certainly didn't know what love could build from ashes. Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital room's thin curtains, casting long shadows across Earl's bed. The TV mounted on the wall droned quietly, cycling through the same headlines about frozen assets and fraud investigations. Empty coffee cups and wrinkled blankets scattered around the room showed signs of their overnight vigil. Lila stood by the window, her shoulders tense as she watched another news van park outside. She hadn't slept, hadn't changed out of her soot-stained dress from the block party. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. The door burst open. Jess stormed in, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her face red and blotchy from crying. Micah trailed behind her, clutching Reverend May's hand. "How could you?" Jess's voice cracked. "How could you do this to us?" Earl stirred in his bed, wincing as he tried to sit up. "Jess, honey." "No, Dad." Jess pointed at Lila, her hand shaking. "Her secrets did this. All those lies about who she really was, what she owned, and now look." She gestured at Earl's bandages, at the oxygen tube in his nose. "You could have died." Lila stepped toward her stepdaughter. "Jess, please. I never meant what? To hide everything? To pretend you were just some poor single mom when you owned half the city?" Jess's voice rose. "If you'd been honest from the start, none of this would have happened. No scandals, no frozen accounts, no arson." Micah whimpered and pressed closer to Rev. May, who stroked his hair. "That's enough," Earl said firmly, despite his raspy voice. "But Jess wasn't finished. The whole city's talking about us. My friends won't even text me back. And Dad," her voice broke, "I watched them load you into that ambulance. You weren't breathing right. Your hands were all burned, and your face—" She choked back a sob. "Come here. Baby." Earl held out his bandaged arms. Jess ran to him, careful not to bump his injuries as she buried her face in his shoulder. Her body shook with sobs. "I can't lose you too, Dad," she whispered. "Not like Mom." The words hung heavy in the air. Lila felt them like a physical blow. She backed away from the bed, bumping into the windowsill. Earl stroked Jess's hair with his less injured hand. "Nobody's losing anybody," he said. "I'm right here." "And Lila is a liar," Jess spat, lifting her tear-stained face. "She lied to you, to everyone, and now they're saying she stole all that money, all those properties. What if it's true? What if—" "That's enough." Earl's voice was stronger now, despite his injuries. "Lila's my wife, your stepmother, part of this family. But Dad, no buts." He looked at Lila, his eyes soft despite the burns on his face. "Come here, sweetheart." Lila hesitated, glancing at Jess's rigid back. Reverend May spoke up from where she stood with Micah. "Perhaps we should give them a moment, Jess. Come help me find some decent coffee in this place." Jess pulled away from Earl, wiping her eyes roughly. "Fine." She stalked toward the door, pausing to glare at Lila. "Just don't hurt him anymore, please." The door clicked shut behind them. Micah's small voice faded down the hallway, asking Rev. May what fraud meant. Earl patted the edge of his bed. "Come sit." Lila moved woodenly, perching on the mattress edge. "She's right," she whispered. "This is all my fault. The fire, your injuries, the investigation if I'd just been honest from the start." Stop. Earl caught her hand in his bandaged one. You protected yourself and Micah the only way you knew how. After everything with Calvin, the prejudice you faced. But look what it's cost us. Tears spilled down Lila's cheeks. Our reputation, our work, our family. Jess hates me. The whole city thinks I'm a criminal. And you, she touched his bandaged face gently. You could have died in that fire, but I didn't. His voice was firm. And I'd do it again. That little boy is alive because you're a hero, she finished. And I'm just the lying maid who married above her station. That's what they're all saying. Since when do we care what they say? Since it started destroying everything we built. Lila stood up, pacing. Homefront Revival is ruined. All those families we helped, they'll be evicted if my assets stay frozen. And Jess is right, it's all because I kept secrets. Earl tried to reach for her, but the movement made him grimace in pain. Lila rushed back to steady him. I can't watch you hurt anymore, she whispered. I can't keep causing pain to the people I love. Then don't run, Earl said. Don't hide. We face this together. Lila kissed his forehead gently. I need to think, to pray. She straightened up. Rest. I'll be back soon. She slipped out before he could protest, walking blindly through the hospital corridors until she found the small chapel. It was empty, lit only by electric candles and morning sun through stained glass. Lila sank onto the front pew, then slid to her knees. The wooden floor was hard against her legs, but she welcomed the discomfort. It felt like penance. Lord, she whispered, her voice breaking, I thought I was doing right. Protecting my son, building something good from all those years of struggle. She wiped her eyes. But now, I can't hide anymore. These secrets are poisoning everything I touch. Through the chapel windows, she could hear distant sirens, more media arriving. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably another reporter, another accusation, another piece of her life falling apart. Show me how to make it right, she prayed, pressing her forehead against her clasped hands. Show me how to fix what I've broken, please. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the dusty basement of City Hall. 4 veterans hunched over stacks of manila folders, their faces grim with concentration. Mike Chen, who'd served with Earl in the motor pool, squinted through his reading glasses at property records. Next to him, Sam Washington, their former sergeant, meticulously logged findings into a laptop. Look at this, called Marcus Rodriguez from his corner. He held up a wrinkled document. Another LLC registered to the same P.O. box as Kincaid's other shell companies. How many is that now? Sam asked, fingers hovering over the keyboard. 17, Marcus said, all buying up properties in minority neighborhoods right before mysterious code violations forced the owners to sell cheap. The 4th veteran, Tony Brooks, wheeled his chair over to examine the paper. His prosthetic leg caught on a box, sending folders tumbling. Sorry, guys, Tony muttered, bending to gather the scattered papers. Hold up, Mike said, grabbing one that had slid his way. This might be something. He smoothed the document on the table. Purchase agreement from 6 months ago. Property on Mason Street. That's where the fire started. The others gathered around as Mike traced his finger down the page. Look here, he said. Previous owner was forced to sell after multiple citations. Buyer is. He squinted at the signature. Shield Property Management, LLC. Sam typed rapidly. Shield Property Management. Yep, same P.O. box as the others. Kincaid's fingerprints all over it. But why target that building specifically? Marcus wondered. It was one of Lila's best renovations. Tony snapped his fingers. The timing. The fire happened right after the Homefront Revival launch party, when the whole city was starting to support Earl and Lila's work. Kincaid couldn't let that happen, Sam growled. Would have exposed his whole operation. Mike pulled another folder from his stack. There's more. Look at these bank records. Regular payments from Shield LLC to, he paused, jaw tightening, to Calvin Rowe. Lila's ex? Marcus leaned in. The one causing all the custody drama? The same, Mike confirmed. $5,000 every month, starting right after Earl and Lila got married. Sam's typing grew more forceful. That snake was feeding Kincaid information about Lila's properties, helping him target the renovations. And then filed that anonymous complaint to freeze her assets, Tony added. Classic divide and conquer. Create chaos, then swoop in to buy everything cheap when she's forced to sell. The veterans worked in focused silence for another hour, building their case. Finally, Sam sat back, rubbing his eyes. "We've got it," he said. "The whole paper trail. Shell companies, fake violations, payoffs, everything linking Kincaid and Calvin to the fraud allegations and the fire." Mike gathered the key documents into a fresh folder. Time to take this to Earl. They found Earl in his hospital room, working through physical therapy exercises for his burned hands. Lila had stepped out to check on Micah, who was with Rev. May. "You boys look like you've been through a war zone," Earl commented, noting their dust-covered clothes and tired faces. "More like a paper war," Sam said, laying the folder on Earl's bed tray. "But we found what you needed." Earl paged through the evidence, his expression darkening. When he reached Calvin's bank records, his hands trembled slightly. "That lowlife," he muttered, "taking bribes to help destroy his own son's future home." "It gets worse," Mike said. "We found documentation proving Kincaid orchestrated the whole thing. The complaint that froze Lila's assets? Filed by one of his shell companies. The fire? Started on property he secretly owned." Earl's jaw clenched. "He tried to burn out those families. Could have killed people. We've got enough here to take to the DA," Sam said. "Banking fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, they'll lock him up for years." The door opened, and Lila entered. She froze when she saw the veterans gathered around Earl's bed. "What's happening?" she asked cautiously. Earl held out his less injured hand to her. "Come here, sweetheart. The boys found something." As Mike summarized their discoveries, Lila sank into the chair beside Earl's bed. Her face paled at the mention of Calvin's involvement. "All this time," she whispered, "he was working with Kincaid to destroy everything we built, using our past to help that man target our community." "But we've got them now," Marcus said firmly. "Black and white proof of what they did." Earl shifted in his bed, reaching for the crutch leaning against his nightstand. Despite the nurse's protests, he insisted on standing for at least a few minutes each hour. "The question is," he said, carefully getting to his feet, "are we ready for what comes next? Taking this public means facing the whole city, media circus, more rumors, probably uglier ones." The veterans exchanged determined looks. "We've got your back," Sam said. "Both of you. All the way," Tony agreed. Lila touched the folder of evidence, her hand trembling slightly. "They'll try to discredit me. Say I'm just as corrupt as they are." "Let 'em try," Mike said. "Truth's got a way of coming out." Earl turned to Lila, leaning on his crutch. His burned face was solemn, but his eyes held steady warmth. "We've got the proof," he told her quietly. "But we'll need courage to face the city." Camera flashes lit up the Hawthorne Foundation's marble lobby like summer lightning. Reporters packed the space shoulder to shoulder, their microphones thrust forward like spears. At the podium, Preston Hawthorne adjusted his silk tie, his usual confidence tempered by something new, humility. Earl and Lila sat in the front row, their hands clasped tight. Jess had an arm around Micah, who fidgeted in his Sunday suit. Behind them, Reverend May and the veterans formed a protective wall. "Thank you all for coming," Preston began, his voice steady but lacking its usual polish. "I've called this press conference to address the rumors and speculation that have dominated our city's attention these past weeks." He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a sealed envelope. The room fell silent, except for the rapid clicking of cameras. "I hold here the results of a DNA paternity test conducted with full consent of all parties involved." Preston broke the seal with deliberate care. "These results conclusively prove that I am not, as was suggested, the father of Micah Martinez. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Earl felt Lila's hand tighten in his. He squeezed back, offering what strength he could. "But that is not why we're truly here today," Preston continued. "We're here because I owe several people an apology. First and foremost, to Lila Martinez Carter." He turned to face Lila directly. "Years ago, my late wife Margaret saw something in you that I was too blind to recognize. She saw integrity, intelligence, and a vision for what our city could become. When she chose to mentor you, to help you begin investing in properties, I dismissed it as one of her charitable projects." Preston's voice grew thick with emotion. "I was wrong. The work you've done, quietly, without seeking credit or acclaim, has done more good for this city than all my public developments combined." Micah squirmed in his seat. "Mama," he whispered loudly, "why is Mr. Hawthorne being so nice?" A few chuckles broke through the tension. Preston's face softened. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said, "Yes, young man, I am being nice because your mother deserves it. Because I should have stood up for her weeks ago when these rumors began. Instead, I distanced myself to protect my image." He squared his shoulders. "That ends today. I am announcing a full partnership between the Hawthorne Foundation and the Homefront Revival Initiative. We will provide matching funds for every property renovation, legal support to fight predatory developers, and job training programs through Earl Carter's Automotive Center." Earl sat up straighter, surprise evident on his face. This hadn't been part of the planned announcement. "Furthermore," Preston continued, "I am stepping down as chairman of the zoning board, effective immediately. Recent evidence has come to light regarding corrupt practices that I should have caught. My negligence allowed certain parties to exploit our city's most vulnerable residents." The reporters burst into questions, but Preston held up his hand. "There will be time for questions, but first, I'd like to invite Lila Martinez Carter to speak." Lila rose slowly, smoothing her simple blue dress. Earl watched her walk to the podium, seeing not the nervous woman who had first served him coffee at church, but a leader finally stepping into her light. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne," she began, her soft voice somehow filling the room. "When I first came to this city, I worked as a housekeeper in the Hawthorne mansion. Margaret Hawthorne taught me that wealth isn't about what you own, it's about what you build for others." She gestured to Earl and the children. "My family has taught me that love isn't about what you hide, it's about what you share. And this city," she paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "This beautiful, broken, healing city has taught me that community isn't about who belongs and who doesn't. It's about who stays to do the work," a reporter called out. "Mrs. Martinez Carter, how do you respond to allegations that you deceived your husband about your financial status?" Before Lila could answer, Earl stood up. His burns were still healing, but he moved with purpose to join his wife at the podium. "May I?" he asked her quietly. At her nod, he turned to face the crowd. "Folks want to paint this as some kind of scandal, poor mechanic, fooled by a secret millionaire." His voice carried the same no-nonsense tone he used with difficult customers. "Truth is, I married a woman who serves others without seeking credit, who builds homes instead of fortunes, who teaches our son that real wealth is measured in the lives you lift up." He looked at Lila, his eyes soft with pride. "I'd marry her again tomorrow, whether she owned 1 house or 1,000. More questions flew from the crowd. What about the fraud allegations? "Will you address the fire at the duplex? Are criminal charges pending?" Preston stepped forward. "Those matters are now in the hands of the district attorney. I can say that the Hawthorne Foundation will be cooperating fully with the investigation into certain board members and their business associates." Lila straightened her shoulders, standing taller than Earl had ever seen her. "I've spent years working quietly because I feared how wealth would change people's treatment of my son. But hiding let others control the narrative. No more." She reached for Earl's hand. "My husband taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand in your truth. So here's mine. I own properties throughout this city. I earned every deed legally. And with Earl and the Homefront Revival Program, we're going to keep working until every family has a safe, affordable place to call home. The reporters surged forward with more questions, but something had shifted in their faces. The hunger for scandal was being replaced by genuine interest. Several nodded in approval. One older journalist in the back actually smiled. Micah broke free from Jess and ran to his parents, wrapping his arms around Lila's legs. She lifted him up, and Earl put an arm around them both. "One more thing," Preston said, rejoining them at the podium. "The Hawthorne Foundation is establishing a Margaret Hawthorne Housing Trust with Lila Martinez Carter as its first director. Because my wife was right. Character matters more than credentials. Vision matters more than status." The cameras flashed again, capturing the moment. Preston extending his hand to Earl and Lila, Micah waving to the crowd, and behind them, Rev. May and the veterans standing proud. It wasn't the end of their challenges, but it was a beginning. Truth in the open, at last. The mahogany-paneled courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as Lila Martinez Carter approached the witness stand. Her simple navy dress and pearl earrings reflected her dual nature, both the humble church volunteer and the astute businesswoman. Earl sat in the front row, his work-worn hands clasped tightly together. Judge Eleanor Martinez, no relation, adjusted her glasses and nodded. "Please state your name for the record." "Lila Martinez Carter," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Mrs. Martinez Carter, please explain to the court how you acquired your real estate holdings." Lila's hands smoothed her skirt. "I started as a housekeeper at the Hawthorne estate. Mrs. Margaret Hawthorne noticed I was studying real estate investment books during my lunch breaks. She began teaching me about property management and helped me invest in my first building, a rundown duplex that nobody wanted." "And how did you expand from there?" "I lived in one unit and fixed up the other. Rented it at a fair price to a single mom who'd been living in her car." Lila's voice strengthened. "When she cried holding those keys, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. Every profit went into buying more properties, always the ones others overlooked. Always for people who needed a chance." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call our first community witness." An elderly woman with silver hair made her way to the stand. She leaned on a cane but held her head high. "Please state your name," the judge instructed. "Martha Washington. Been living in one of Ms. Lila's buildings going on 8 years now. And how would you describe your experience as her tenant?" Martha's face lit up. "When my Herald passed, I couldn't keep up our house payments. Other landlords wouldn't even talk to me. Said I was too high risk on Social Security. But Ms. Lila, she not only rented to me, she made sure the bathroom had safety rails installed. Checks on me during heat waves. Never raised my rent once." More tenants followed. A veteran with PTSD who found peace in a quiet courtyard apartment. A young mother who described how Lila had helped her escape an abusive relationship. A teenager who told how Earl had taught him auto repair skills in the garage's apprentice program. The prosecution presented documentation showing how Kincaid had used shell companies to hide his slum properties, then filed false complaints to freeze Lila's assets when her success threatened his schemes. Calvin's involvement came to light through text messages plotting to extort money for false paternity claims. When Kincaid's attorney tried to paint Lila as a manipulative social climber, she remained composed. "Yes, I kept my wealth quiet. I saw how people treated the wealthy Mrs. Hawthorne, always wanting something, never seeing her heart. I wanted to help people without them feeling less than. Maybe that was wrong, but every decision I made was about giving others dignity." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "I've heard enough. This court finds no evidence of fraud in Mrs. Martinez Carter's business dealings. Her assets are to be unfrozen immediately." She turned stern eyes to Kincaid. "As for you, Mr. Kincaid, you are hereby indicted on charges of fraud, filing false reports, and criminal conspiracy. Bailiff, take him into custody. Addressing Calvin, who slumped in his chair, she continued, Mr. Rowe, this court orders you to complete a 6-month rehabilitation program and make restitution to the tenants affected by your actions. Consider yourself fortunate that Mrs. Martinez Carter declined to press additional charges. The courtroom erupted in muffled cheers. Earl stood, his eyes shining with pride as Lila made her way back to him. Outside on the courthouse steps, a crowd of tenants surrounded them. Martha Washington hugged Lila tight, her cane clattering to the ground. Others pressed forward with tears and thanks, the veteran saluting sharply, the young mother lifting her toddler so Lila could kiss his cheek. Earl wrapped his arm around his wife's waist and leaned close to her ear. You didn't just win a case, he whispered. You won back our tomorrow. The morning sun streamed through New Day Fellowship's stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. The church buzzed with energy as congregation members filed in for the special meeting Lila had called. Earl sat in the front row, his Sunday suit freshly pressed, while Jess helped Micah color quietly beside him. Reverend May stood at the pulpit, her silver hair catching the light. Brothers and sisters, we're gathered here today to witness something extraordinary. Lila Martinez Carter has asked to make an announcement that will affect our entire community. Lila rose from her seat, smoothing her simple floral dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the podium, but her voice was steady and clear. When I first came to New Day Fellowship, she began, I was a single mother with nothing but hope and determination. This church became my family. You welcomed me, loved my son, and never once asked about my bank account. She paused, looking out at the familiar faces. Mrs. Washington sat near the back, nodding encouragement. The veteran Earl had trained last month gave her a thumbs up. God blessed me with success in business, but those blessings came with responsibility. After much prayer and discussion with Earl and Rev. May, I've made a decision about how to honor that responsibility. She motioned to a man in a suit who sat near the side door. He approached carrying a leather briefcase full of documents. This is Mr. Jenkins, my attorney. Together, we've prepared papers to transfer 1/3 of my property holdings, over 200 units, into a community land trust. A collective gasp rippled through the sanctuary. Whispers erupted as people turned to their neighbors, trying to understand. For those who don't know, Lila continued, her voice growing stronger, a community land trust means these properties will be permanently preserved as affordable housing. No developer can ever buy them and raise the rents beyond what working families can afford. The trust will be governed by a board that includes tenants, community members, and housing advocates. Earl beamed with pride as his wife explained the details. The trust would maintain strict income requirements for tenants. It would offer paths to home ownership through lease-to-own programs. Current residents would have guaranteed renewal rights as long as they followed the rules. But that's not all, Lila said. Earl and I are dedicating the garage as a permanent job training center. Veterans and at-risk youth will learn skilled trades that can support their families. We're partnering with the community college for certification programs. Reverend May stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Lila's shoulder. The Bible tells us that to whom much is given, much is required. Today we're witnessing true stewardship, not just of money, but of hope. Mr. Jenkins spread the documents on a table that had been set up near the altar. Lila picked up a pen, her hand steady now. The sanctuary fell silent as she began to sign. One by one, other signatures followed. Earl as board member, Reverend May as community representative, Mrs. Washington representing the tenants. Even young Micah was allowed to make his wobbly mark as a witness to history. When the last page was signed, Rev. May lifted her well-worn Bible high. This, she declared, her voice ringing with joy, is stewardship in action. The choir, who had been waiting for their cue, burst into Great is Thy Faithfulness. Their voices soared to the rafters, and soon the whole congregation joined in. Amazing Grace, How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Tears streamed down faces throughout the sanctuary. Mrs. Washington dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. The veterans stood at attention, singing with military precision. Young mothers hugged their children close, knowing their futures were more secure. Through the second verse, Jess slipped her hand into Lila's. Their relationship had been rocky at first, but now the teenager looked at her stepmother with genuine admiration. Micah squirmed between them, not fully understanding the magnitude of the moment, but feeling the joy that filled the room. Earl wrapped his arm around his wife's waist as they sang. He remembered their simple courthouse wedding, how he'd thought he was rescuing a struggling single mom. Instead, she had shown him what true wealth looked like, not in bank accounts or property deeds, but in lives transformed and hope restored. Rev. May's voice rose above the music. This is stewardship in action. The choir erupted into song, their harmonies lifting the words toward heaven. Sunlight poured through the fellowship hall's windows, casting a warm glow on the white lace and yellow sunflowers decorating the simple space. The wooden walls seemed to glow with the same golden hue as the blooms that adorned every corner. Folding chairs, arranged in neat rows, held familiar faces from the congregation. Mrs. Washington dabbing her eyes already, Earl's veteran friend sitting straight-backed in pressed shirts, and dozens of tenants whose lives had been touched by the Carters' work. Earl stood at the front, his work-worn hands clasped before him. His suit was new this time, Lila had insisted, but his expression held the same tender nervousness as their first ceremony. Rev. May stood beside him, her Bible open, her gentle smile radiating maternal pride. The piano began to play softly, and heads turned toward the back of the hall. 7-year-old Micah appeared first, his small face serious with concentration as he balanced a white satin pillow. 2 simple gold bands nestled in its center, their original rings, now accompanied by small crosses engraved with today's date. Behind him came Jess, tall and elegant in a pale yellow dress that matched the sunflowers. Gone was the defensive teenager who had once viewed Lila with suspicion. In her hands, she held a well-worn Bible, marked with a ribbon at 1 Corinthians. Then Lila appeared, and Earl's breath caught audibly. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, her dark hair swept up with small white flowers. Unlike their courthouse wedding, where she had seemed to shrink into herself, today she walked with quiet confidence. Her eyes never left Earl's face as she made her way down the aisle. When she reached him, Earl took her hands in his. His calloused fingers trembled slightly against her soft ones. "Dearly beloved," Rev. May began, her voice warm and strong, "we gather today not to create a marriage, but to celebrate one that has already proven its strength through trials and triumphs. Earl and Lila have chosen to renew their vows before God and this congregation, acknowledging that love grows deeper when tested by truth." She nodded to Jess, who stepped forward and opened her Bible. Her clear voice filled the hall. "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal." She paused, looking at her father and stepmother with genuine affection. "If I have the gift of prophecy, and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing." Earl squeezed Lila's hands as Jess continued reading. They had lived these words in the past months, learning patience, kindness, and truth. Love that kept no record of wrongs. Love that always protected, always trusted, always hoped, always persevered. "Love never fails," Jess concluded softly. Reverend May turned to Micah, who stepped forward with the pillow. His small face beamed with importance as Earl and Lila each took a ring. "Earl, Rev." May said, "Will you continue to love Lila, honoring her truth, supporting her mission, and walking beside her in faith?" "I will." Earl's voice was rough with emotion. He slipped the ring onto Lila's finger. You taught me that real strength isn't in what we earn, but in what we give. I promise to keep building this dream with you, one family at a time. Lila, Rev. May continued, will you continue to love Earl, sharing your whole self, trusting his heart, and walking beside him in faith? I will. Lila's eyes shone with tears as she placed Earl's ring. You showed me that wealth means nothing without wisdom to use it well. I promise to keep serving alongside you, helping others find the dignity they deserve. Micah tugged at Reverend May's robe. Can I say something too? Soft laughter rippled through the congregation as Reverend May bent down. Of course, little one. I promise to be the best son ever, he announced clearly. Even though Daddy Earl isn't my birth daddy, he's the daddy God picked special for me and Mommy. Earl knelt and gathered the boy into a tight hug. There wasn't a dry eye in the fellowship hall. Rev. May raised her hands over the family, Earl still holding Micah, Lila with one hand on her son's shoulder, Jess completing their circle. What God has joined together, let no one put asunder. Through secrets revealed and truth embraced, through fire and restoration, these two have shown us what love really means. She smiled broadly. Earl, you may kiss your bride, again. The congregation rose to their feet, voices lifting in song as Earl kissed Lila. Their favorite hymn filled the fellowship hall, surrounding them with its promise of grace and redemption. The late summer breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and newly cut grass as Earl and Lila sat together on the worn concrete steps of a newly renovated duplex. The building's soft blue paint glowed in the golden evening light, its white trim crisp and clean against the darkening sky. Earl stretched his legs, still a bit stiff from his injuries, but healing well. The sound of socket wrenches and good-natured banter drifted from his garage across the street, where 3 apprentices worked under the supervision of his most experienced mechanic. The shop's neon open sign cast a warm red glow on the sidewalk. Listen to that, Earl said, nodding toward the garage. Music to my ears. Lila leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. Better than when it was just you working alone until midnight? Much better. He squeezed her fingers. Though I miss having you bring me coffee on those late nights, pretending you were just another struggling single mom who happened to be passing by. She chuckled softly. I wasn't pretending to care, just hiding other things. I know that now. He kissed the top of her head. And look what caring did. They watched as children played an enthusiastic game of tag on the duplex's small front lawn. 2 girls cartwheeled through the sprinkler while their mothers chatted on the neighbor's porch, the porch light creating a warm circle of welcome in the gathering dusk. Down the street, more lights winked on, porch by porch, like fireflies coming out at twilight. Each light represented a family who now had a safe place to call home. Veterans who'd found stability, single parents who'd discovered community, elderly folks who could age in place with dignity. Mrs. Washington waved from her rocking chair next door, her orange tabby cat curled in her lap. Beautiful evening, she called. And those petunias you planted are coming along nicely, Lila dear. Thank you, Lila waved back. They remind me of the ones Mrs. Hawthorne used to grow. Earl noticed how easily Lila now mentioned her former employer's name. The pain and secrecy had faded, replaced by grateful remembrance. Preston Hawthorne himself had become a regular visitor to their community projects, his initial awkwardness replaced by genuine commitment to their cause. Jess emerged from the duplex behind them, carrying a tray with glasses of lemonade. She'd started her first semester of college, but still came home every weekend to help with the after-school tutoring program they'd set up in the community center. Here you go, she said, handing them each a glass. Micah helped make it. He's very proud of his squeezing technique. As if summoned by his name, Micah burst out of the house, clutching something in his small fist. His sneakers lit up with each bouncing step as he plopped down between Earl and Lila. Look what I found in my old toy box, he exclaimed, opening his hand to reveal a tiny brass key on a red plastic ring. It's from that toy cash register Mommy got me when I was little. Earl watched as Lila's eyes softened at the memory. She'd bought that toy during her struggling single mom days, saving tips from her cleaning jobs to give her son a special Christmas present. From the garage came the sound of tools being put away for the day. The apprentices emerged, wiping their hands on shop rags and calling goodnight to each other. One young woman paused to high-five Micah before heading home, her tool belt jingling with each step. A car slowed as it passed, and Calvin, Lila's ex, gave a small wave from behind the wheel. He was 9 months sober now, attending his meetings faithfully and paying his restitution on time. Micah waved back, before turning his attention to his toy key again. "Can I give this to the new little girl next door?" he asked, "since her daddy just got his real keys today?" Earl felt his throat tighten with pride. The new little girl was the daughter of a veteran who'd completed their job training program. Today he'd received the keys to his very first stable home. "That's very thoughtful of you," Lila said, smoothing Micah's hair. "Why do you want to give it to her?" Micah considered this seriously. "Because keys are special. They mean you belong somewhere." He looked up at Earl. "Like how Daddy Earl gave us a key to his house before you got married. Remember, Mommy? And now we all belong together." Lila reached into her pocket and pulled out another toy key, this one silver plastic on a blue ring. "I have something for you too, mijo. I found this while we were cleaning out the old properties." She placed it gently in Micah's palm. "So you'll always remember that having a key means having a home." Earl wrapped his arm around Lila's shoulders as they watched their son examine his new treasure in the fading light. Across the street, the garage sign hummed quietly. Up and down the block, porch lights cast their steady glow. Children's laughter echoed as parents called them in for dinner. Screen doors creaked and slapped, car doors thumped softly, and somewhere a radio played an old gospel tune. Lila leaned into Earl's embrace, and they sat together in the growing darkness, watching their neighborhood come alive with evening routines. She whispered something that made him smile and nod in agreement. The richest people are the ones who open doors. If you enjoyed the story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.